Come on, come on, come on, come on. Let's start.
Let's.
What?
I'm trying.
Have you been stopped in your tracks or
No, no,
something?
no. I'm just now trying to remember the start of the Muppet Show theme song.
Dun, 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 dun,
No, no,
dun,
no,
dun.
no, no, no. I need the text.
It's time to start the
Yes.
music.
So it's time to start the podcast. Anyway. Anyways.
In that
let's-
metaphor, I'm guessing that we are Stalin and Waldorf.
No. I'm feeling like Kermit today.
Oh, Kermit.
Anyways, welcome to the Dead IT Show, the podcast about everything and nothing. But today we have an actual topic.
Wow.
And the topic is you trying to explain to me how to be more scientifically productive. Or
Some science research.
yes, science
journals,
research and
whatnot.
everything else, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to lift the wheel of the scientific production and how to actually create a paper, create a relevant paper, get it peer-reviewed, and then get it published.
And corresponding metadata stuff.
And then profit.
I'm not
For
talking
the-
about profit, for
Yes.
fun and profit.
yes,
Yeah,
because
okay.
we are doing the podcast and trying to understand how the scientific production works. What does it take to create a publicly available paper? What kind of journals there are? What kind of papers there are?
Mm-hmm.
And what the quartiles are.
Okay. Let's
Now let's roll the intro, and then I'm going to get your PhD experience on this.
And you specifically mentioned in one of the previous episodes that you're not going to use PhD like that.
No. I'm not going to attribute you as a PhD. But Vedran, your PhD experience is required now.
Oh man,
but-
as if you never wrote the paper.
No. Your experience as a published author is required.
Okay.
And I must say that you, unlike me, have published in much more prestigious papers that are on the market.
You helped.
But unlike our colleague, which published in Q0 paper,
Oh, yeah.
yes, and it wasn't on purpose.
Yeah, by accident.
So accidentally publishing a paper on the Q0 is one of the things that we need to mention.
Yeah.
And let's start with this. How do you publish in a Q0? What does it mean Q0?
Okay. Let's first start with some terminology, and I'm going to get to Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q0, whatever. So just a couple of terms, couple of minutes, because these terms are very important for anybody who wants to do scientific research. First and foremost, one of the most important services in terms of scientific research is called ORCID.
Okay.
We call it ORCID for some reason, although it's not an orchid, it's not a flower. Open Researcher and Contributor ID. That's the acronym for that. Basically, it's an identifier that you get for free on ORCID's website, which serves as your digital identity as a researcher. To it, you can link your other accounts related to your research. Most commonly, you link your accounts that are in scientific databases like Scopus, Web of Science, and then many others, Taylor, Francis, Wiley, Springer, whatever. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. I'll mention a couple of additional terms. So Web of Science, Scopus, WoS, or Web of Science, is one of the very popular citation databases, just like Scopus, just provided by different corporate entities in a sense. Web of Science is provided by Clarivate Analytics, and Scopus is another citation database that is provided by Elsevier, a different corporate entity again. Both of them track citations, research impact, and whatnot. Basically, they track your papers and how many times they were quoted in other people's papers, because that's one of the measurements for the scientific impact that you have on the world. And also they have multiple sub-databases in a sense. For example, Web of Science has sub-databases like, let's say, what were they called? SCI expanded. So these are sub-databases that are related to various research fields. For us, we're talking about computer science in this episode. So for us, SCI, scientific database, and the expanded version of that are very important, and current context, what used to be a Reuters database. And Scopus is basically like a competitor type of database when compared to Web of Science, which also has multiple different, let's say, journals, many journals and many conferences that are indexed there and whatnot. So that's the basic. Now we can talk about Quartile. Quartile is in scientific publishing, so Q0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. They're basically different levels of classification of the scientific journals that measure impact factor, citation metrics, and whatnot. And out of that, you get a sense of how important a journal is. If something is Q1, that journal is much more respected, much more important in the scientific world than a journal that's Q3. That being said, there are loads of Q3, Q4 journals that are on their way up towards Q2, Q1, again measured by the amount of quotations and whatnot. So it's not as clear-cut as saying Q1 is always much better than Q4, because already next year some journal might jump from Q4 to Q1, and then it would completely invalidate your point of saying Q1 and Q4 is like Mount Everest and, sitting at the dock of the bay.
Okay, but let me just interject and just ask you one thing. There is 1, 2, 3, 4 quartiles, and then you have Q0.
Yeah, Q0 is even better than that.
Okay.
Let's call it that way. So a much more, the lower you go in number, so towards Q0, the higher the impact the journal has. Basically, it's more respected.
It is harder to publish.
But much more harder to publish, correct. A vast majority of the papers that you want to publish are going to be much more harder to publish in Q1 versus Q4.
Because I think that most of the people who are not into scientific community and they don't understand what the scientific community usually hear either about Nature, or some of the other extremely well regarded journals.
Okay.
And what they usually do is they hear it when somebody publishes something that is actually groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And those papers are far and long between them, those.
They're very rare.
They're extremely rare. This is one of those things that people don't understand. When somebody says that they publish something in Nature, usually, from my perspective, what I saw when I was talking to different people who are not in scientific publishing, they said, "Oh, okay, so your paper is like you published in something like Nature." No, it is a paper that I published in a journal, but it is not Nature. If I were able to publish in Nature, I would probably not need to introduce myself.
Yeah, most commonly that's especially in computer science.
Yes.
And technical sciences in general. Well, just a side note, I know the Nature as a magazine, as a journal very well. Again, publicly available data. I did 11 reviews for them in the past 2 months. Seen varying degrees of excellent to very bad papers, so they also get their fair share of that. But for the most part, papers that are published there are, top of the pile.
But this is one thing, and the other thing is that what people are usually thinking about is the fast-tracked papers that are fast-tracked for a reason, and this reason has to be something extremely, extremely important. For example, the AI field right now has a couple of fast-track papers that, especially on DeepSeek, that got published basically overnight.
Yep.
When it comes to scientific contributions. Because thinking about publishing a paper that is going to be submitted, reviewed, and then published in 2 weeks is something that probably a couple of people can do per year.
I'm just writing a time code for my cough.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, okay. Also, we need to distinguish between various types of articles. A very, very important topic. For us as people who either already did the PhD or are aspiring to do it in the future, the most important type of article is always going to be a journal article. Regular journal article, that's the
poster.
Yeah, the poster, right. Journal article means the regular normal type of article that's published in a scientific journal. Those are very common article types, and they are most important as a measurement tool. They're used as a measurement stick for your scientific progress in most of the, legislatures of the world. And there are other types like review article, proceedings, methodologies, methodical article, case study, brief report, case report, prior report. There are many of these types. There are actually various types of journals that are meant to just do like a review paper, like a literature review paper, like current state of the field and whatnot. Depending on the country you live in, they might be counted differently towards your scientific progress based on the legislative branch and how the framework for that works. In Croatia, basically only journal papers are important from the perspective of publishing. Depending on the criteria, in some other areas, even conference papers might be important, and this is a distinction that we need to also make, depending on the way in which you want to count the points. It's a points-based system for progress in the scientific field towards new callings like professor, permanent professor, whatever. The conference papers, this is one type of paper versus a journal paper, they have almost nothing in common, except that they are called paper. For example, Yasmin published as a primary author quite a big bunch of papers in various conferences. You have a nice stack of those. I did as well. But those papers are much more leniently reviewed because they are not aimed to produce necessarily huge amount of new science. They are more for presenting in front of your colleagues to get feedback so that you can then get into the real science as a result of that. Let's call it that way.
They're basically intended to just stir some communication among people who are doing the same thing and to get some feedback on what is actually happening in the field. But the idea of the papers, of all those papers that I made, was not to create a deep insight into something,
into
just
the
science things. It was much more just a reviewing of what is currently on the field, what is happening, and what my proposal for the solution of a particular thing could be, but without going into too much detail. Because these are small papers, 2 or 3 pages long, that were just basically reviewing what was happening.
Yeah.
Specifically, this episode can be considered a science. It's not a paper, but it's a science contribution.
Yeah.
Because actually, when you are talking about something and when you are reviewing how the field works, it works.
It's kind of like a reviewing paper.
Yes, reviewing article, reviewing paper, reviewing whatever. And I think that we should be pushing for another thing, and this is to include the newer media into the scientific world.
Okay, like?
Because I think that videos, not precisely this video, but also videos, should be on the same level when it comes to importance as articles.
I agree.
Because what you could learn from a good lecture or a review video is something that actually makes sense. And you could contribute with a 15-minute video, you can contribute to a science in so many ways. And this is still not, it's still frowned upon. People say, okay, it was a nice video, but can you write it down in an article?
Yeah.
And this is one of those things.
Okay, so we divided the papers into 2 general types, so conference versus journal. Journal ones are much more difficult to publish. They take much more time for the reviews to come in. They are most commonly much more expensive to publish. They're usually longer format articles than the conference papers. Most conference papers that I did require to have maximum, let's say, 7-8 pages, even shorter than that, depending on the conferences. IEEE, ACM, and many of those very familiar acronyms even in the computer industry have hundreds of different conferences happening every year all over the world, but most commonly they have shorter format of those. journal papers are different. We have a couple of journal papers that we published in the span of last year that are 30, 40 pages plus long. I currently have one that's 50 plus pages long to review, so it's completely common to have much longer format. That being said, one of the key differences, other types of differences between the journals, specifically journal papers, is whether or not they are open access or they're subscription based. This is one of the biggest discussions happening right now in the IT world, and if you read anything from TechCrunch all the way to LinkedIn to whatever, BBC, you're going to find every month or so there are a couple of articles coming out based on the local geography of wherever the website or a magazine or whatever journal, regular papers are published about some organization having a contract with a certain scientific institution or a set of them, or a country-wide contract for scientific publishing. And the biggest kind of like discussion there happening is, of course, as always, money.
Yes,
Open
for profit
publishing is
yes.
something that's currently being heavily debated because, realistically speaking, and I'm not here to bash on that, most of the big publishers, so Taylor and Francis, Wiley, Springer, Elsevier, MDPI, and whatnot, earn many, many millions of dollars per year to publish these articles. I'm not bashing against that. I understand why. But the fact of the matter is that scientific publishing has grown very expensive. There are countries that are just unable to, localities all over the world which cannot conjure that amount of money to pay for scientific paper publishing. Hence the reason why these discussions about open access versus the idea of subscription-based access is heavily in rotation right now. Personally, as a matter of choice for myself and for you as well, and because of the fact that we are in the computer science field, we chose, our choice is to always publish open access. That means that our institution that we work for pays for the publishing, and then the access to the article is free for everybody else. I find that to be fair. It's just the fee question that is debatable, because there are journals that are, let's say, our latest paper that we published in Q4, a journal is $830 or $930, something like that, versus some of the Elsevier and Springer journals that can be $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to publish. Of course, there are fundamental differences between Q4 and Q1. There is a huge difference in quotation count when you publish in Elsevier and Springer journal versus something that's Q4 somewhere at the bottom of the list. All of that is valid. As I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, the time for review is also a very crucial aspect of that. For some reasons, especially when you're trying to do a PhD or get published or get some kind of promotion, sometimes the timelines of the publishers can get in the way as well. What usually people want to do when they move into the scientific field, so if they want to become teachers at the university or something, so you want to attain your PhD and continue in the field that you PhD'd on, what people usually want to do is publish the articles in high-impact journals. High impact being, again, Q1, Q2, Q0 if you're lucky enough. The indexing that happens via Web of Science and Scopus is also going to be very helpful from that aspect. And then there are a couple other things. On a per-country basis, you usually have some kind of a local, something similar to what I mentioned about ORCID. For us, there is a system called Quartile in Croatia, which is basically our local version of ORCID, in a sense, in which we have to add our papers that we published and books and scientific books and lectures and conference papers, whatever. And usually that database is used on a per-country scale so that somebody can determine whether or not the papers were published, indexed, whatever. But the rule of thumb here is to always have the ORCID, the international version of that, up-to-date, connected to all of the publishers where you published any kind of paper or that you reviewed for. because ORCID has two tabs that are important in that direction. A little bit lower, I'm going to show it in a second on my laptop. In one tab, you see your published work, and in the other tab, you can see your peer review work as well.
Let me interject because I want to get some points across when it comes to open and closed publishing and
Subscription-based versus open, okay.
Or paywalled or not paywalled, or however do you want to talk? Because we need to make a distinction between paying for the publishing and paying for the reading.
Yes.
Reading. So the access and the publishing are two different things.
Correct.
So they are paid access and paid published paper. You can also participate in papers. You can give your papers to journals that are not incurring any fee for the publishing. These are rare. And these are usually low-impact journals that are trying to get their way through. So they usually have peer review, but they're not asking any money. But on the other hand,
you can have them subscription-based for the reader as
yes,
well.
But they can also be subscription-based for the reader. So nobody's going to pay to publish, but everybody's going to pay for reading the articles inside.
Different combinations.
So it could be a problem. And also, this is somewhat of a tragic thing. Because Google it up, there was a huge controversy back in I would say a decade or so, and there were some tragic events concerning these controversies and publishing on papers, getting papers from the paid journals online without paying those journals. There are some sites that are basically pirating the papers and making them available online. And this is a huge thing in the scientific community because not everybody can afford to pay for the research. Mm-hmm. It's not only that you need to pay to publish. It's fine. But sometimes you want to have the access to the file, and the file itself costs 50, 60, 100, 200 euros or dollars, whatever, just to get to read the paper.
And if you're writing a paper and you did 50 of those, then...
Yes, it can add up.
Yeah, you can easily end up in thousands of dollars,
this
euros,
is why
whatever.
research is expensive.
Yeah, this is why the movement towards the open access is so prominent in the past 5 years or so, especially from the perspective of the readership. So the reading of the papers, this is one of the key points of that movement, is to have the readers reading the capability to read the papers for free, which I'm all for. Hence the reason why we made the decision to always publish in open access journals, for which we paid for the publishing, but they are free for everybody else to read the articles. Why is that important? Because that can then spur further research. So we are kind of doing best of the both worlds. The publishing without paying anything just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work because you need to make some kind of money in order to run a journal.
Yeah, you need to pay the reviewers, editors. There are people who are working there, especially in good journals.
And one more thing while you're preparing, because I was looking up some things, and I remembered that we need also to mention that journals and conferences are usually related, and in such a way that journals are much more influential than conferences.
Correct.
But then there are some conferences that are more influential than journals.
Correct. And there's actually a huge movement nowadays towards hybrid type of situation, in which you have the conference, out of which a journal publishes a paper, not the conference proceeding.
So, for example, SIGGRAPH.
Yeah, and
SIGGRAPH is one of the most prominent conferences that when you are able to present a SIGGRAPH, you are probably presenting something groundbreaking.
Yeah, supercomputing conference, and there are others that are really, really influential, which are more towards this hybrid model. I was invited to do a MDPI symmetry the conference on which I could present the paper. So it's, again, the hybrid model that these are
in
more
general,
towards.
Papers are more important than conferences.
Yes,
or journals are more important than conferences. But at the same time, if you are able to present on a conference that is high impact, it could mean much more things than just getting the paper.
There's a reason why. Because when you go to a conference, there are people there.
There are people there, and also the number of slots on the conference is extremely limited.
Yeah.
Because a journal can be published
Every day, 100
monthly,
articles. Yeah.
monthly, weekly, whatever. And the conferences are usually held once a year, and they probably have 20 or so slots for the presentations.
Yeah.
So we are not talking about the conferences when you can have 20 different tracks, which presentations every 10 minutes. We're talking about conferences that have 20 slots for the presentations. That's it. In front of extremely influential people.
Yes, and hundreds of them also usually. It's not a small thing. If you went to SIGGRAPH or supercomputing conference or whatnot, you easily have an audience of 500, 600 people there. Highly influential people.
And also people who, once they mention you and they do a citation of your work, you are going to get cited a lot.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly correct. Okay. Now we're going to switch a little bit to my computer. So this is my ORCID, and I can switch to yours as well, but I'm just going to use myself as an example. Again, free registration.
We should use you as an example, yes.
Why?
No.
More people there?
No, just we should use you as an example. I'm all for using other people as an example.
Yeah, come on, you're not a bad example.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, in the ORCID, there are certain logical parts that you do, like your email and your websites and whatnot. You do your name, biography, employment history, education, qualification history, whatnot, if you're a member of some kind of a professional organization and if you are part of some kind of funded project, whatnot. And then there are two super important things. I only have one because the synchronization still hasn't happened. The first one is works. This is where your indexed papers from conferences and or journals are going to be present. And the second one, which I don't have right now, but I could show you an example because our colleague does have it.
Please please don't do this scrolling because this. I have to. No, because this is going to extremely
get a headache to somebody.
No, it's going to be extremely bad when compressed by YouTube.
Whatever. There we go. For example, the last part, which I'm going to get filled when the sync happens, is the peer review. So this is the part of the story in which you're sitting at the opposite side of the fence, where you're refereeing, as we call it, where you're acting as a reviewer. So that's that. In the ORCID, there are configuration options for you to integrate with various other databases. This is something that I went through with all of our colleagues and assistants and you as well. So Scopus is connected here, my researcher ID from Web of Science and the science profiles and whatnot. But if I really go to my configuration for a second, in my trusted parties, which you need to configure from those parties, I'm going to talk about all of these in a second. Crossref, Clarivate, which I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, Elsevier, MDPI, Overleaf, which is a tool for tech publishing, Scholar Ones, Springer Nature, Web of Science, Zenodo for quotation plugin and whatnot. But let's just focus on a couple of important ones. Let's say Crossref. If you go to Crossref, you're going to notice that this is a third-party system which references all of the papers. And it is one of the, it's like, I wouldn't say the governing body, it's an organization that was arranged by a variety of scientific publishers in which all of the papers are indexed for automatic publishing. Specifically, I'm going to show you one thing here. If a paper is published, just as an example, by MDPI, which is where a lot of my papers were published in some of their journals. When the paper is published, it gets indexed in Crossref and in MDPI system, and both of them can update your ORCID profile.
Okay.
I'm going to show you how that looks. I think I didn't delete the references to those. Just one second. I'm going to go a little bit down. You can see here, for example, advancing cybersecurity with honeypots and deception strategies. And I have this preferred source field here. If I click on it, you can see that both MDPI and Crossref indexed this paper. And I can then select which one is primary. It doesn't really matter which one. But most commonly, we have the Crossref as a preferred source because it's third party. It is not managed by a specific scientific publishing house or corporate entity or whatever it is. So most of them are there. Then you can see that it also gets the metadata. Some of them are journal articles, some of them are conference papers, some of them are published in a certain year, 2024, some of them are, if I go a little bit lower, it's going to be 2023 and whatnot. Some of them are IEEE conferences, some of them are not, some of them are local conferences. We published quite a few papers on this MIPRO conference in the past couple of years. And as you kind of like, as years go by, more and more entries, as you publish more papers and whatnot, are going to appear here. So that's the ORCID, which is like a centralized resource to which you synchronize all of your other publishing resources so that somebody who needs to take a look into this has up-to-date information. The two parts of the story that are hooked up to ORCID for me are Web of Science, for example, and Scopus, the indexing databases that I mentioned earlier. You can see that my ORCID has been registered here from Web of Science perspective, and the same thing goes to Scopus. In these databases, the published papers and conference papers are referenced and indexed. Here I have, 19 publications. Some of them are in the specific database or a specific part of their database. For me, for our area of scientific research, which is computer science, the most important database is Web of Science Core Collection, which has a couple of different indexing schemes. For us, the most important part of it is that the papers that we published, as much as possible, are part of something that's called C expanded indexing or CC, current context, because those are mandated by law and by our regulatory agencies for us to publish in the journals that are indexed this way so that we can get promotions or let's say to go from a status of associate professor to regular professor, stuff like that.
Let me just stop you a little bit because I want to mention one more thing that actually popped into my mind while you were presenting this thing.
Okay.
Archive or arxiv.
Arxiv, yeah.
Yes. Can you try to explain to people what that is? Because it's everything all at once.
And nothing.
And nothing. Because there is a lot of papers out there that are going to say we are in preprint and archive, and this preprint becomes no print at all because they don't get accepted anywhere, but they are also getting cited. And
okay.
this is one of those things where it's difficult to tell what's what, and because there is no peer review.
Okay. In arxiv.org, if you want to call it that way, yes, there are a lot of preprints. Preprints are articles that have been usually uploaded for a peer review, but haven't been published or reviewed yet. And there are multiple services like this in the world. The archive.org is not the only one of them.
But I think it's one of the biggest, so...
MDPI has preprints.org, which is also quite big. And I have a couple of articles there, but I stopped publishing to preprints because I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of spam emails.
Yes.
Because then people notice that you have an article. The idea of preprint is here very important here. So it's you announcing that you have a paper on a certain topic coming out with the name and the abstract. And then journals and conferences can look into that and say, this is very interesting for me. Let me contact that author. Maybe he or she wants to publish with me. That's the idea of a preprint.
And also to announce something, because if you...
reserve a topic, for example.
You're reserving a topic because what you want to say is that if you are going to be waiting for 18 months for the peer review, you want to be able to say, okay, I have started or I'm in the middle of researching this topic, so I'm the first one researching this thing.
Yes.
So you are just basically stating to the scientific world, I'm right now doing this thing on this thing, so I either want other people to know, or I just want to make sure that I'm attributed as the first one in this field.
Which is super important in scientific community at times.
And specifically with patents.
Yeah, and our Q0 colleague had a couple of issues with a couple of very hairy situations in the past in which he already prearranged which topic he's going to do for a PhD, only for that topic to be then published because he didn't preprint.
Yes.
He did it twice. He lost 2 years of his life because of that. A story for another day, but it can happen. Okay, so let me just go back to this. In my Web of Science profile, I have a stack of papers that I published, most of them this year, or let's call it this way, in the previous year. You can also look at the publications that are not indexed by the core collection, which are not a part of this. They're usually the SC index, which is the door towards having C expanded, or they're not indexed at all in Web of Science. And you have non-indexed publications as well. These are the articles that are not going to be indexed by Web of Science at all, but they're there as a courtesy, or maybe on the way to be becoming indexed as well. For example, this one, role of container security and application development, we published that a month ago or so in Q4 journal by Edelweiss. We published a whole stack of papers there. I have a paper in MDPI Informatics, which is not indexed by the Web of Science, but is still here. And, for example, Journal of Cybersecurity and Privacy, there's some of the things that are very important to explain here. This is a perfect paper to do it. This paper, so acronym of that is JCP. We usually refer it to MDP JCP. This paper in Scopus is Q1. So basically the highest 25% in terms of indexing and referencing and whatnot in the area of computer science. But at the same time, it's not indexed in Web of Science at all. That can happen. So we need to be aware of the fact that just because something is Q1 somewhere doesn't mean that it's Q anything anywhere else in any other database.
I think that we should make a comparison to IQ tests.
Okay.
Because when you are talking about IQ tests, you're basically talking about comparing one thing to another thing.
Okay.
You're comparing a certain person's capability of doing some sort of a test.
Okay.
This thing is more or less the same thing. It depends on who is testing, who is establishing the criteria, and how the criteria is being then applied to different journals. So being listed, being cited, and everything else is just objective, but also a subjective things to say. Because you are comparing different papers, and the composition of the papers that you're using when comparing is going to dictate what Quartile actually means.
Let me give you a very plastic example how unrealistic this is at times. Okay? Because what Yasmin is pointing to is actually the fact that you might have, for example, Q1 is Scopus, which is not indexed in Web of Science at all, but that doesn't mean that nobody is going to read that article and or journal.
And also, it doesn't mean that the journal itself is irrelevant.
Correct.
Simply because it is not listed. Because this means that they didn't compare the impact of this journal to other journals that they are currently listing. So it depends on the set of the journals. Because the listing itself and the placement in the impact factor of the journal depends on the set of the journals being compared. And
That's
this is a whole
correct.
different topic that people are writing articles on.
Yes, actually I noticed that as well. I want to show you something that's...
Because AI is promising, by AI I mean LLMs, they are promising that they are going to democratize and... level the field, and everything is going to be nice and pink and shiny, and
as it always is when somebody promises something.
So it is one of those things which matter, that are mostly relic of the past. Because journals used to be indexed by hand, and
correct.
we must remember also the history, and that while some of the journals are hundreds or more years old.
Yes.
So they not only got their position in the citations and in the Quartiles simply by being peer review, but they also got their position because they're so old, they're so established that they are cited a lot simply because they were cited a long time ago.
Yeah, by default.
By default, yes.
Okay. Let me show you an example of how unrealistic at times. All of these measurements that we are talking about, indexing, referencing, whatever can be. I apologize up front for using my article as an example, but it is a perfect metaphor for what we are discussing. So this is a paper that I published last year. Yasmin knows about this. This is a topic that we discussed. Basically, the central paper of my PhD thesis. It's quite long and whatnot, but what's important about it, this paper from the perspective of this discussion is at the very end, which is the article access statistics. So this paper was read 113,535 times.
Okay. And it got 5 citations. Okay.
5 citations.
Yes.
Keep those two numbers in mind
Yes.
for a second, because I'm going to introduce another thing to this discussion. I'm going to go. This is the journal that where I published this article. I'm going to filter all of the articles published in all of the years since this specific journal has been published from. And this article is at the very top of the list from 1996. Basically, 30 years of this journal. This is by far the most read article by a factor of 2 against the next one.
And the next one has 429 citations.
Yes, and it has 65,135 views. Now, in the modern internet era, if we were talking about the views, it's obvious which would be more important. In the science community, the fact that the second paper has been cited 428 times obviously is much more important. I'm not saying that as somebody who's mad about this. I'm just stating the fact.
Let's just put this into perspective, because I'm thinking about another thing. For every 155 people who read the second article, they cited it.
Correct.
For every 22,600 people who read the first article, they cited it.
Yeah.
So this
huge
is the difference. Huge difference.
But there's also probably there are more than a few reasons. I'm kind of sensing that there's one very important reason why. And this is coming back to the episode that we did about my PhD. I ran headfirst into an area of computer science where nobody was. This paper that I published, of course, a lot of people read it. It's going to take months or years for it to get cited more. But I think that it is kind of like a start of a shift from, specifically in this topic we talk about HPC and Kubernetes and whatnot. I've noticed that in the past year or so, since I published it, quite a few papers have appeared with those two topics combined, not necessarily in the way in which I did it, which involves a complete platform for it, done in an optimized way, but still. So the statistics of the first paper, again, correctly pointed out by you, might significantly change. It can significantly change in a day. It can change in 2 days, in 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. So maybe, I'm hoping that it's going to happen, but I will not lose any sleep if it doesn't. Maybe in a year or two, if we manage to do some stuff that we are trying to do, maybe that paper is going to have 438 citations, or maybe up to 5,438 citations, which would be good for some metrics of some things that are related to our careers.
Yes, but the thing is that one of the things that make citations important is because citations are probably a proto-viral thing in scientific community.
Completely correct.
Because what you could have, and what happened a couple of times, usually when the Nobel Prizes come out, is suddenly a certain field or a certain researcher or a certain university or whatever becomes important, and people race to cite them as many times as possible, because they want to be cited by themselves. So they're just basically piling up on a person because they want citations to be appearing in different papers. So it's a thing that can be compared to virality of videos in YouTube and something else, Because the importance of the video doesn't directly correlate to the number of people who viewed it.
Correct.
And so the citations and the viewing numbers don't correlate directly.
Yeah. There's one other thing very important for this. If we were, two of us and our gang of brothers that wrote 50 papers in the past year or so, maybe a little bit less than 50, divided between conference and journal papers, we are close to that. If we were only trying to skew the system, and if we were trying to get as fast as possible closer to the top of the pile in terms of citations, because of the fact that we published 50 papers, we could easily do that.
Yes, and this is the citation stuffing is something that actually happens.
Which I do not want to do.
No. Nobody wants to do this because
people do it heavily.
It is easily noticed.
Yeah.
This is one thing. And it happened to you a couple of times because some of your reviewers asked you. The reviewers sometimes go way over the line and ask you to include their own citations inside your papers because they want to get cited.
Which is expressly forbidden by reviewer code of ethics.
Yes, and this is something that can get a reviewer banned not only from reviewing, but also from publishing.
Yeah.
Because using a review process to stuff your own citations is something
abuse of power.
It is an extreme abuse of power.
Yeah. No, nobody
because
wants to.
Because citations are money in the scientific world.
So when we do the papers, whatever, is it conference, is it journal paper, Q1, Q4, or is it just some kind of a local conference which 100 people attend? I don't care. I try not to quote myself. This is the first thing. You should not quote yourself as much as possible. Okay? It sounds ludicrous when I say it like that. But when I publish a paper, if I don't have any other better source that I can find, then I'm going to maybe add one or two references to my paper, but only and only if I cannot find anything else to prove my point.
And just let me.
And I don't do that on every paper.
Let me talk about one exception. The data papers.
Okay.
There is a specific set of papers that are intended just for data distribution.
Publishing of data.
Publishing of data for the sake of publishing the data. So you are not you're not publishing the paper with any thesis or any solution or anything else other than actually publishing a data set that you created while you were doing something else, and then citing yourself with your own data set actually makes sense.
Absolutely.
Because this means that you are citing something, you put out a data set that everybody can use, and then you are using it and then citing it, of course, because you need to cite it, then it actually makes sense. Everything else is really loud when it comes to...
it's a gray area.
Yes, it's a gray area.
Or a black area. Basically what I do, I've shown you the main paper of my thesis. I published, let's say, 5 more related to that. But they are small bits and pieces of that architecture that are sliced into various new methodologies of doing things. Then I will reference the key, like the key central paper once. That's it. But I will not start, cross-referencing myself every single time. I could easily pile up hundreds of references. If I publish 50 papers, I could create 1,000 references in a year. No problem. For me as an author, I just don't want to do that. So I only expressly do it if, as Yasmin pointed out, if it's data-based, if it's some kind of a connected set of papers, then it absolutely makes sense to reference yourself, but only upwards in a hierarchy towards one of the papers, not every single one of them. I don't do that ever. And everything else, no, you shouldn't do that. Your example, actually, I forgot about that. I had a reviewer asking me to add free papers from IEEE conferences / IEEE Access to one of my papers. Those papers that he wanted or she wanted to be included in my literature review part of my journal paper.
Trace back to the same person.
Actually, when I did a search for those papers, I analyzed the authors. For all 3 papers, one person was the author on all of them. For 2 of them, One person was author, and the third person was author also of the two. It's clear as day that they are trying to push you to self-reference them. And I expressly, just the key point, the papers that person wanted me to reference had nothing to do with my paper. I flat out refused to do that, and you should always do it as well. And I wrote in the cover letter to the editors, okay, so these papers that he wanted me to reference, I'm not going to do that. You can check out why. And I'm going to reference some others that have something to do with my paper from IEEE or whatever it may be. Actually, to the one key point that I really like about publishing with MDPI, they never ever asked me to reference any one of their articles published in any one of the MDPI's journals.
Which some of the other journals actually do.
Some. Most of them do that, especially conferences.
Conferences tend to ask you to always include the reference to the conference because they want to be referenced at least once in each conference paper.
And some of the conferences that we publish ask 5.
Yes.
3 to 5.
So they say just you need to reference us no matter what, and then you can reference whoever you want.
Yeah, which
is a huge problem when it comes to some conferences because usually conference papers are much shorter.
Mm-hmm.
If you have 2 or 3 pages to write a paper and you are required to reference something, you are pushing it extremely to the extreme when it comes to publishing, because you want and you have to reference something that is not going to fit your paper. You need to try hard to find something that is going to be referenceable, which shouldn't be part of the scientific process. But anyways,
reviewers should actually,
there it is.
In the code of ethics for the reviewers, this is expressly forbidden. So they can absolutely, any reviewer can tell to the paper authors to add more references. That's a valid point, but you should never tell them which ones. That's that's something that people do not want to allow. Okay, so that's that part. The process that we described is basically at the end of the writing of the journal. If we are the ones who are writing the paper for journal or for conference, that part of the process is completely different, obviously. First, you have to select the topic. How do you find the topic? The most common way in which most people find topics to write for conferences or for journals is to try to find what is currently hot topic, try to find some small piece of it that's not covered, and then write a paper about that if it's possible. That's one of the ways. How do you do that? By going to said Web of Science, Scopus, whatnot, and do a keyword search in the title or in the content, in the abstract of the paper, whatever, which is something that's very wasteful in terms of time. There are AI-based tools that we could use nowadays for that.
Which are extremely...
which are really good to kind of like shorten the path a little bit, like...
I sense the problem consensus. With the AI tools have their own set of problems, and
yes.
The problem is the same as with Google search or any other search on the internet.
Yeah.
The journals that they're searching needs to be indexed before you can search for them. Mm-hmm. So you are basically missing the entirety of some fields because those journals are behind the paywall or are not indexed by the particular search engine.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where you need to have in mind that you are not searching the entirety of the human knowledge. Yeah. You are searching a particular subset of papers that are being indexed. But I'm constantly talking about science being different sets of different things being compared to different sets of different things. And this is the main problem with science and the main problem with the human endeavors as such, because there is so much content being created, not only for the science, but everything else, that it is almost impossible to keep track.
Yeah. This is where AI tools can be very helpful.
Yes.
So we use consensus and elicit, stuff like that, to kind of like search through the topics that we selected to find the papers that are in that scientific area so that we can verify whether or not our topic that we want to cover is already covered. Okay, and AI tools do speed up the search there. Definitely, that makes it easier. It's no different to doing a Scopus advanced keyword-based search with a couple of logical terms. It's no different to that, or in Web of Science, which we can easily do. Then what we usually do, at least I do it that way, maybe you're different, I usually download a set of those papers because we have paid access to those databases. I download at least 15, 20 of those papers, minimum. If I'm writing a journal paper, I don't want to have less than 20, 25 references. I download them and then I check them. First and foremost, I sit and read the abstract and the conclusion of the paper, because if the paper has been written correctly, the abstract should tell you almost everything that you need to know what's covered in that paper. If not, you can read the intro and the conclusion, and that should be that. But oftentimes I have to read the whole paper. It depends.
I'm going to go controversial here and say I'm just reading the conclusions.
Abstract is a much better way.
No, the reason why I'm reading the conclusions is because when I read the conclusion, I can see if the result was speculative or it was something that actually came out of the research. And then I can read the abstract to understand what the person who wrote the paper wanted to say. But the conclusion gives me the idea of what the process was. So am I interested in the process or am I interested in the thought process?
Okay.
So do I want this article for the data, or do I need this article for the thought process and for the ideas that were given in it?
And maybe offer some new ideas to it, of course, yes. Yeah, that's good. So that's what we tend to use a little bit of AI for. Everything else, well, you could argue Grammarly is AI-based as well, so we use it for editing, but who doesn't? Actually, a lot of the journals that you can find on the internet expressly tell you that you should go to an article by using Grammarly or something like that. So
it is. I would say that using AI today is completely normal.
Yeah, but I don't want to use it to write the paper.
No. You could use it to write the paper, but the problem is that
and spend 100 hours checking everything.
No, it's not only this. Especially with this, with the papers that are smaller. There is not a lot that AI tools can help you with that you are not going to be faster at. Because if you are deeply in the particular field and you want to write something that's going to be 2 pages long, you are going to, by using ChatGPT or any other LLM, what is going to happen is that you are going to save yourself, 1 hour of typing. But you need to check every word, and it is going to meander across different things that you don't want mentioned in your article, because your article needs to be on point and it needs to be 2 pages long. What all the LLMs are doing, they're usually pushing for creating words, not creating coherent thoughts that are summarized. So using AI for a small paper is usually counterproductive.
Yes.
It doesn't make any sense because you need to shorten the what AI gave you.
And it's very verbose.
And it's much easier to just write it directly.
For me, that's just more pronounced in a journal paper, which is longer format, because then I need to spend even more time checking everything. I just don't want to do that. I usually write completely different. I usually write some pointers, like bullet points. I want to say that, which came out of this and this and this research that I did or we did. This is the set of data, graphs, tables, whatnot, and try to make a coherent, as you say, thought out of that. Then I write the abstract and the introduction and the conclusion. I usually write the body of the central part of the paper first. And there are different schools of thought there. And
I'm completely with you. When anybody asks me to write anything, and when they need an advice on how to write something, it could be an article, a paper, journal article, a journalistic article, whatever. I always tell them to start from the middle, because people tend to overthink the abstract.
Yes.
And people tend to overthink the introduction.
Yeah, and conclusion.
You want to, if you know what you're doing and if you understand what you're trying to achieve, start describing it. And then once you start describing it, you are going to get into details that you want to have in the abstract, and also the details that are going to get introduced by the introduction that you can do later.
Yeah, right now, now it's going to be 10 years or so that I'm doing papers, either on conferences or on journals. Last month, because we are co-authoring a paper, our colleague and myself, for his PhD, this was the first time when I went the opposite direction. So he told me what he wants the topic of the paper to be. I'm familiar with the area that he is researching. I wrote the abstract, I wrote the introduction, I wrote the literary review, again, in consultation with him because I know what's coming afterwards. And he's going to do the middle part and the conclusion. That's also a way in which you can do a paper. And you could argue that it's a completely ass-backwards way of writing a paper, and I will agree with you. But in this case, it was the only available option because the center of his paper, where he needs to present the stuff for his PhD as well, so it's a mandatory paper for his PhD, is something that requires a lot of statistical and mathematical analysis. And he is working on that with a team of experts. I don't know what's going to come out of that, but the abstract, introduction, and the literary review part, or related works part, whatever you want to call them, can be written 99% without knowing what's coming afterwards. And I leave the red marked parts, which he will have to correct in the abstract and in the introduction and in the conclusion when he gets the data. So he knows that he has to correct a little bit of it. But basically, I've done 1/3 of the paper. For him, he's going to do the remaining 2/3. Everybody happy.
Okay, but you are now
backwards way, much more difficult.
You are now explaining how the sausage is done, and we don't want that.
Yeah, we don't.
But anyways, what else do we need to talk about when it comes to scientific papers?
I just like to cover one more topic. So I covered the way in which you can find the topic. For the paper, research via AI or directly via databases, read the articles, read the abstract, introduction. Sometimes you'll have to read the whole paper to kind of understand what the author is saying. So that's a part of the research in a sense. And then it's about writing the paper. This is something that's either romanticized or overcomplicated by people for no reason whatsoever. I'm going to be very specific. You know a colleague of ours who I've been basically whipping for the past 6 months. He has a stack of data and a couple of papers to publish, but he doesn't want to sit his lazy ass at the keyboard and start writing. And I'm pushing him to do that. But that's beside the point. What is very important is wherever you are trying to publish, is it a conference or is it a journal? Doesn't really matter. There is an algorithm of how to do it correctly. You don't need to figure stuff out by testing and erroring, although you could. And we did many times. You go to that specific conference or a journal's website. You download a stack of 5 papers in your general area of expertise where you want to write a paper. For example, computer science.
That got published by this
paper. That got
paper.
Published.
Yes.
Conference or journal, doesn't matter. You read the papers. That's 3 hours of work. Then you look at the way in which the paper looks. Very important.
You note the structure.
Structure is important because there is an algorithm there. Abstract, how long is it? Introduction, how long is it? Does the introduction part have the scientific contributions that are written there? Make note of that. Does it have the contents of the next sections inside, which it usually does? Then it's related works. Then it's the middle part where you develop your science, whatever it is. Then it's future works. Then it's some kind of a conclusion, references. You have to notice the structure of the paper.
How many images? How many
images?
How many
tables?
Yes.
References. Kind of like references are wildly different from paper to paper. Kind of like arithmetic mean is okay. If one paper has 50, the other one has 30, 30 to 40 is enough. 30 is always enough, basically.
I'm going to say that I once again want to interrupt with a completely unrelated but still related analogy. And I think that this is the same thing as when trying to play something to a song that somebody else has prepared. So all the videos that you see on different drummers, different people playing guitars, pianos, whatever, who are writing down their parts while listening to somebody else's work. This is the same thing. You need to understand the structure, and you need to understand the way that this thing was assembled. Let's call it assembled because it is. And then trying to mimic the structure, but make your own content.
Correct.
And this is the thing that people usually fail to understand. And the most important part is start.
Yeah.
The colleague that you mentioned, I had a talk with him because I was doing a conference, 2 conference papers for a small conference here in Croatia. And the thing was that I had an idea what I wanted to write. I had basically the outline of what I wanted to do. And since it was something like 4 pages for both of the papers, I said, okay, I'm going to write those down in 2 days. I took the whole 2 days off and I said, okay, I'm going to write this down. At the same time, I was talking to the colleague of ours, and he said, no, you need to write, you need 2 weeks to write those papers. And I said, no, it depends on what you're trying to do. I'm trying to get published in this particular conference. I know what the structure is. I know
the pointers of what I want to say.
I know what I want to say. I know how much of the things that I want to say are complicated. How much of the things that I want to say need to be documented and researched and so on, and how many of those can actually just be said. And then I wrote the papers. They got reviewed. They didn't got stellar reviews, but they got reviewed. They got accepted, and I presented the conference. He still didn't do his first paper.
Yes.
It was last year.
Yeah.
So the thing was that sometimes it's just the most important thing is to actually start.
Yeah. Finding Forrester. There is a scene in that movie in which Sean Connery describes to a young author what it means to write. And the first step is take a freaking keyboard and start writing.
Also, there is an author that is currently extremely cancelled on the internet, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he's a professional author. I'm not going to go into politics and everything else, so I don't care. But he's an author that is well published. He has published enormous amount of books, and his suggestion was just wake up in the morning and start writing.
Yes.
You are going to write crap, and then you're going to write something brilliant. You just need to understand which one is which. And in the end of the day, you're going to end up with throwing 70% of what you're writing. But 30% is going to be brilliant. So just write it down.
And actually, to close this off, one more thing. People have asked me, especially our colleague, how did I and this was a question by the colleagues on the college where I PhD'd as well as you, and as well as more than a few people in our university. How did I manage to write and publish so many papers?
You're insane.
No. If we forget about the papers that we wrote with our students, for which they did a lot of grunt work, they were mentioned as authors. We do that. We do all of that very, very fair and square way. The papers that I wrote, much more complex, but people tend to forget. And this is the primary beef that I have a lot of our colleagues on this specific topic. The reason why I published 6 or 7 papers related to the PhD is super straightforward. Over the course of the 7 years where I attended the PhD, I wrote a gazillion text files with those bullet points. When I measured stuff, I wrote them down. And again, to your point, 70% out the window, 30%, maybe a little bit more than that because experience, got transferred to a set of data that was something that's manageable and has actual point, because I had a lot of results which I cannot really use for very scientific points to make or scientific contributions and whatnot. But I did that for 6 years before starting to publish them. So, of course, it was easier for me if I have the middle part, as I was mentioning earlier. So what I want to say is already there. I just need to format that. Then writing the first and the last part is super easy.
But the thing is that the same thing is when writing any kind of content.
Correct.
All the tools that you are going to download from the internet, there is a Scrivener, there is a couple of different tools that enable you to write prose. I'm not talking about scientific papers. I'm now talking about simply novels,
Writing.
books,
Yeah.
writing, whatever. They're going to give you an ability to just create chunks of texts that don't belong anywhere, but they're in the same project. And then you arrange those pieces of text so that they make sense.
Like a puzzle.
And then you say, okay, I need to fill this void. And this void is something that's going to connect those pieces of text together. It is the same with the scientific papers, but it is much more condensed.
Yes.
And I would just venture and say that writing scientific papers is even easier. Because when you need to write prose, you need to be interesting.
Yeah.
When you need to write scientific papers,
You just need to be correct.
You need to be correct and factual. And it's much easier to be correct and factual when you are doing something.
Correct. I agree completely.
On the other hand, the biggest problem that we have right now, probably in the scientific community and all the other communities, is because there are people who are doing things and not documenting them. And also we have an enormous amount of people who are trying to cheat the system.
Yes.
Because the system itself is partially broken. I'm not going to tell it it's broken completely, but it's partially broken.
Yeah, we can talk about that in another episode. There's a lot of stuff to be said.
There is a lot of stuff to be said, and there is a lot of stuff to be said when it comes to people pointing at other people saying, oh, they're citation stuffing and they're doing whatever, cross-referencing and so on. But on the other hand, they're doing this themselves, either directly or completely without thinking about it. Because bias with citing your own people who you know is huge. So if I'm writing a paper, I'm more likely to cite Vedran than any other person in the world, simply because I know what he wrote, and I don't need to read the entirety of the article because I was talking to him about this thing, so I'm more familiar with what he did.
Or you're already a part of the writing process, so you know what's there.
And it's easy to overstep into just citing people from your own university which is often done, and this is a huge problem.
Yeah, it's going to keep on happening because there's no way to stop that.
Okay, did we cover everything?
Yeah, for the time being, I think we did. We could do a couple of other episodes related to this topic, even cover topics of writing an actual paper. We can figure out some kind of a completely ludicrous topic and spend an episode writing the paper. I had that idea to do.
And let me finish this thing with an AI supported content, because I wanted to, actually, I never took time to see what are other types of articles that can be published officially.
Okay, I already mentioned them.
No. For example, there are types of articles that nobody mentions because they are rarely used. Letters to the editor.
Correspondence, which used to be very important in the
pre-internet era. In the pre-internet era, correspondence was important because there were no other forums to write about a particular article.
Yeah.
So letters to the editor actually meant that you are commenting on somebody else's work, usually contributing something else, but it doesn't fit into the this is an article, this is a paper.
Yeah.
Also, reports, short communications. It says short communications brief reports.
Yeah.
This is one of those things that journals that are trying to aim for the impact factor can be enormously impactful just by publishing a report that nobody else does.
No, there is a simpler way, much simpler way.
Okay, which is that?
You pick a topic.
Yes.
And write a up-to-date literary review. And by all means, pick something that's very popular. So, for example, let's say cloud is very popular, and you write a literary review paper about cloud and the services and cover big three, Amazon, GCP, and Azure, and you mention all the technologies that they have. That literary review would be 100 pages long, but everybody would cite you. Everybody doing anything in cloud.
This is one way, and the other way is to just go with raw data and then publish it with minimal editorials, and then just say, okay, this is the data that we have.
Feel free to use it.
Feel free to use it.
Yep.
This is, for example, when it comes to cloud, and this is not scientific, but still there is scientific research behind
Applied research.
Applied research, but specifically the HDD statistics from the Blackblaze. This is one of those things where everybody is citing them. They got a ton of views simply because they're publishing a simple one-page table of how many disks failed out of hundreds of thousands of disks that they have. And this is one of those things that you cannot make up. This is one of those things that you cannot simulate. It's just real-world experience that is, I would say, just a small shell script required to for this to be created. Yeah. So there are outliers when it comes to citations, but also there are people who try to cheat the system, and we are going to talk about those probably in one of the next episodes because this one is already too long. So thank you for being with us. I'm going to close my part with saying I have nothing else to say.
No, for the time being, me neither on this topic. But
on this topic, and I'm not going to ask AI to give me another idea what to do.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you.
Yes. Lord. No. I'm going to introduce AI even more into the following episodes because I think that AI has matured.
I don't.
I even think that we need to reintroduce our third host.
That's a good idea.
Yes. So, but on that thing, we need to finish. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for talking with us or listening to us talk about scientific papers and everything else. And see you next time.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.